Good afternoon, and welcome to the Asheville City Council Affordable Housing Work session. This is a work session dedicated to the topic of affordable housing, and this is, as with all of our work sessions, we don't take public comment, nor do we vote on anything. So these are more information sessions, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to the city manager, Deborah Campbell, to get things kicked off.
So thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. I know this is kind of a long day for some of you. I've been in meetings earlier with you, so I really appreciate you all allowing us to kind of squeeze this work session in. This topic around affordable housing is just so critical and important to our community. You may recall that in 2019, we had a similar kind of conversation with council around affordable housing. And if there was one thing that we learned through that session, and I don't think we needed that session to understand that affordable housing and the delivery of this product is hard and it is complicated. If it wasn't, I think we would have more of it. But what we did also learn is that it takes a village. There are lots of things that are needed that, the planets have to align seriously in order for us to address this issue. So far, in terms of the toolkit for the city, we are using as many legal things that we have available to us in our housing toolkit, ranging from financial resources, funding, city-owned land, regulatory, being a convener and a collaborator. But again, what we have learned is that it takes a village. It is not just the city's responsibility to address this need. We can't. We don't have the resources. And we have to partner. We have to rely on the entire community to help us address this need. Now, I'm going to get out of the way and really let the experts, Paul D'Angelo and Nikki Reed, who are with our Community and Economic Development Department, they're going to do the heavy lifting. And essentially, what we hope to get out of this conversation with you is we are going to share a little bit more information about, the complexity of housing and, again, delivering this product, talking about the needs and how significant they are within our market, rehash kind of some of the city's approach, what we have done in the past, projects that we have completed or are currently underway. And then, as the mayor said, we don't necessarily want you all to take any action, but we would like a conversation around whether you think that we are going in the right direction. I think what you will find is that we are trying to address a broad spectrum of needs. We use that term continuing of housing, and that means all the way from someone who is homeless to all the way to someone who's at 100 or 80% of the area median income. So at the end of this session, beginning with the end in mind, essentially, we want to share with you a work plan for 2021 and get you all's kind of nod as, yeah, I think you all are doing the right things. And it seems like the partnerships that you are engaging in are the partners that we should be working with. So with that, I will turn it over to Paul D'Angelo, and thank you all for your attention. Also, before we start, we do have some scheduled kind of Q&A, but please feel free to ask questions as we progress through the presentation, because there are a lot of slides. So please feel free to interrupt. So thank you very much. Paul?
Thanks very much for that, City Manager Campbell. We appreciate that. Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. Paul D'Angelo here with the Community and Economic Development Department, and I'm going to get us started here. along with my partner in community and economic development, Nikki Reed, who will lead up the second half of this presentation. So I'll go ahead and get us started. I think that City Manager covered a lot of that. So our big challenge in Asheville and our big challenge of affordable housing is that most wages, salaries, and incomes we produce in our area don't support the average housing costs in Asheville, both rental and home ownership. A healthy, affordable, mixed income community needs a variety of housing types at a variety of price points, both home ownership and rental, for the variety of incomes and wages produced in Asheville. Next slide. So unfortunately, it is a numbers game more often than not. And it's not just a numbers game for the developer who's trying to put together a balance sheet and a pro forma based on expenses, the income they expect to receive, and the very important cash flow that the banks want to receive. But it's also a numbers game for our individuals and families in Asheville who are struggling to make their balance sheets work with our higher housing cost in this area. Next slide. So a mismatch often occurs between the lower wages that we have here in Asheville, as well as the higher housing costs and the pricing of housing here in Asheville. Also a mismatch with those developers who are at the table trying to make affordable housing work in their projects that they're building, often a mismatch there between their expenses and that cash flow, as well as a supply and demand issue. Asheville's got a very high demand market. We don't have a lot of supply of housing. And I'm sure most of you have heard of houses being swooped up in one day that are put on the market. So a couple of mismatch challenges we have. The HUD definition, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, I'm sure most of you know this, is that households, both rental and home ownership, should spend no more than 30% of their gross income on housing costs. If you're a renter, this includes rent and utilities. For homeowners, this would include mortgage, insurance, and taxes. And the more money we spend on housing, the less we have to spend on life's other necessities, whether that's food, transportation, insurance, clothing, etc. But also the money that individuals and families might have extra to support your local economy. So very important that this is a economic issue as well. Next slide. So we work a lot with the Urban Land Institute, and they list those top 9 challenges for pretty much any affordable housing in any community, whether that's cost of capital, lack of building efficiency, materials, lack of density, NIMBYism, etc. there. One that's definitely unique to Asheville on that list of 9 there is the land prices and availability. We have a very tight land market and very high land prices. 1 acre of land in or close to the city's urban core, we've seen go for $1 million to $2 million just in the last several months. A couple other challenges that Asheville has that make our affordable housing challenges even more difficult. We have topography challenges, which can, of course, raise the price of development. We have market challenges, as mentioned, supply and demand. What analysts often call, we suffer from our own quality of life because everyone wants to come to Asheville, this great place, high demand for housing, but a low supply. And we also have more of a service and tourism economy here in Asheville. Hence, we often have lower wages that comes along with that type of economy. Next slide. So local housing challenges, here looking at homes by price, we've noticed this trend in home ownership over the last several years. The Bowen Report, which is our housing needs assessment, had this slide, which certainly comes alive here because it shows in 2014 versus July of 2019, about a 5-year span, the number of houses available for sale at certain price points has dropped dramatically. Next slide. And more importantly, when it comes to homes for sale, the Community and Economic Development Department did 2 checks for City Council, one in September and one in early December. And in those 2 checks for sale housing, this past fall, as I said, there were only 38 homes on average in the city of Asheville listed for sale under $275,000 out of approximately 275 listings. That $275,000 for sale price, we feel can work with an individual or family at or below 100% of the area median income. We track that for AHAC, the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, every month to keep an eye on how many homes. Even in the last year and a half, that's really decreased to here, 2 checks of 38 homes. And In addition, the average for sale price of those 275 dwellings listed was approximately $660,000. The median for sale price for the 275 was about $522,000. And our realtor friends who are at the table remind us often that of those 38 homes, only about 25 to 30 of those would be move-in ready based on realtor experience. So we really have a very low supply of housing that can be utilized for individuals and families at or below 100% of the area median income. Next slide. And if we're thinking here about right now our rental vacancy rate, the vacancy rate for our market rate apartments, as we take a look at the rental market, is hovering around 5% from a recent check last month. That is a healthy market-driven place to be, where you're going to see a balance to a certain extent with prices, but you're also going to see new units come online because we need additional supply. But it has a good tendency to at least somewhat control prices, although we've seen quite, some serious price increases over the last 5 years. As you can imagine, the vacancy rate for affordable apartments remains at 0 to 0.2%. If an affordable unit comes available, it is immediately filled up. Those affordable apartment vacancy rates remain low and have consistently for the last 5 years. Next slide. And thinking a little bit more about the rental versus the home ownership market to try to bring this home a little bit, this slide is really interesting because it shows an income trend. 2 or 3, 4 years ago, you would see the tipping point when people move from rental and go over to home ownership at or about that 50 to 60,000 household income range. That has climbed up the income chart. So now we're seeing more and more folks, even at 70, 75, or 80, not quite being able to afford home ownership in Asheville, so they're remaining renters. So that challenge for people to move into home ownership, for wealth building, for all of our individuals and families in Asheville, is climbing up the income chart to about 70 to 80,000 to be able to afford a home in Asheville. Next slide, Nikki. So again, taking a look here from the Bowen Report, our housing needs assessment, at our folks that are cost burdened. About nearly half of our renters are cost burdened, which means they're paying more than 30% of their income cost towards housing. Nearly half of our folks out there. About 20% of renters, 1 out of every 5, are severely cost burdened, paying more than 50% of their income towards housing costs. And reminder, the more they're spending on housing, the less they're able to spend on other costs for their household. Rising rents, as I mentioned, even though we have that 5% vacancy rate, which is helpful for somewhat controlling rental prices since 2014, rent in Asheville has increased by about 5.2% annually. So if you were a renter in 2014, spending $1,000 a month, that would now be approximately $1,350. Next slide. And again, Bowen Report, our housing needs assessment, going to the for sale folks, about 1 out of every 5 of our homeowners are cost burdened, more than 30% of their income towards housing. And about 8% of our households in home ownership are severely cost burdened, more than 50%. And this data for sale inventory is from the Bowen Report, but the available homes under $200,000, that's dropped even further since that Bowen Report was published about a year ago. Next slide, Nikki. So often we use area median incomes for Asheville to get an idea of what the area median income is for Asheville and the metropolitan statistical area, Buncombe County, to look at that. So if you hear people say the area median income is $72,500, that's often what's used to talk about a family of 4 at 100%. So that's kind of where in conversations they'll say area median income Asheville is $72,500, 100%, 4 persons. But you can see there's a lot of other incomes there, 80, 60, that are out there. And it's important to note as an example, the average renter salary comes in at about $28,000. So if you're looking at this area median income chart, okay, our average renter that might be near 100% area median income. Actually, it's between 50 and 60% of the area median income coming in at $28,000 is the average renter salary or hourly wage. That's data from the National Low Income Housing Coalition for North Carolina. Next slide, Nikki. And then taking a look at the approximate average rent in Asheville, which comes in at about $1,200. Everything in red, those household incomes, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4 persons, cannot afford the average rent in Asheville. So even a single person at 100% AMI, 1, 2, or 3 at 80% AMI, and pretty much anybody below 60% of area median income. Next slide, Nikki. For the mortgage coming in at about, with the average housing cost of about $325, give or take, $325,000, that mortgage comes in at $1,625. You can see that even more folks can't afford this average mortgage, the average housing cost in our area median incomes and our salaries. Nearly no one at 80% AMI can afford that except a 6-person household, and I would guarantee probably that $325 house is not for 6 people. And so even half of our people at 100% AMI, that $72,500 family I talked about could not afford the average house here in Asheville at about $325. Nikki, next slide. So part of our challenge too, as we're in partnership at the table and understanding our roles, funding, city land convener collaborator funding plays an important part of this, but we have to understand what that subsidy is. So we can expect if we're helping an individual or family at or below 30%, 30 to 60 or 80% AMI, we're going to need, there is a subsidy that needs to be filled by someone. That gap of $80,000, $100,000, or $120,000 per unit. And it kind of flips as well into home ownership too, because when we talk about down payment assistance, in a certain extent, those numbers are very similar in what's needed to get into a home. Mathematically, something that's easy to figure out of like, Paul, how does that gap work? If you think that the average rent is $1,200, but we're asking a developer to charge only $800, that's a $400 a month difference. Times 12 months, times 20 years, which is usually our affordability period, that's $96,000 that's needed there to support that lower rent over that 20-year period. And of course, the bank and developer are trying to fill that. The bank has those questions, and it can be really difficult. That gap depends on your AMI, length of affordability, location of build, but those numbers should look familiar from the September 2019 work session. Next slide, Nikki. So a good amount of data there. We wanted to offer some breaks for you all to see if there were any initial questions on that this first round of slides.
Paul, it's Gwen. When we're considering housing costs for condominiums, does that include the homeowners association or the condo fee or not?
It can, and on our home ownership calculator that we have, which is known as Appendix 2, we're going to try to put an actual live version on the city website for people to calculate it. But we do include right now $50 for a condo, which you know is very low. So we adjust that when we look at the prices. But it does include a condo fee often.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Great summary of the Bowen Report. I'm curious, in light of all these larger projects that keep trying to develop this outside the city, I'm wondering, has Patrick Bowen or the research group behind these studies ever expressed where or how high a vacancy rate in market rate areas needs to go before we see some prices coming down? If we know healthy is 5 to 6%, if there were a glut and we got to like 9 or 10%, did you ever talk about that when we might see a little decrease?
I want to say that can happen when you see an 8 to 10% vacancy rate, that you'll see those price changes. Patrick Bowen is watching live on YouTube. Knowing him, he will probably text me that figure, so I'll be able to get that. Nikki and I have some support folks on YouTube just in case, but we can get that figure. I think it's about 8 to 10%.
Thank you. And thank you, Patrick, for listening in.
Any other questions? All right, I'll continue. Nikki, next slide, please. So if you remember from our September 2019 work session, there were a few takeaways that we had there. Supporting partners already doing the hardest work, those folks working with the individuals and families under 60% of the area median income. Identify the gaps in the partnerships, the funding, the programs, the incentives, the regulations, and fill them so the municipal resources can go farther for the 60, 80, 100% AMI individuals. That means examining our policies, our incentives, taking a look at new funding that might come around. The 4% tax bond recently had an adjustment that should make those numbers work better. So very important for us to understand those gaps. A call on for-profit developers and lenders to be a part of the solution, and to build community coalition and bring more partners to the table. So hopefully we'll demonstrate in a few minutes how we're trying to do that. And so in this complicated world that we live in, we try to simplify this as much as possible. So we look at our role, especially in the funding and the policies and the incentives, that we need to either invest upfront on the build and incentivize the developer, or invest on the back end and subsidize the renter or home ownership. So we're trying to just, simplify this as much as possible, because it's tough work, a lot of moving parts. And of course, to do that, we need those partners who are either developers or the partners who are really working with the families. Next slide, Nikki. So right now, most of our policies, as you all know, are what we call 20-80-20. We're asking for at least 20% of the units at or below 80% AMI for a minimum of 20 years, with a strong preference for at or below 60% AMI. If a developer of any kind is bringing that to us for the rental in particular, we hopefully have some policies that can match with the work that they do and being a part of the solution. Whether that's the disposition of city-owned land, where we're using city land for affordable housing, our housing trust fund, which is our own internal bank where we're able to offer low interest loans, our land use incentive grant, where we're offering a property tax grant rebate back to the developer in exchange for affordable housing. The Metropolitan Sewer District offers a discount between a market unit and an affordable unit, where the developer saves about $1,200 per unit. And we also have fee rebates for folks, whether you can get 50 to 75 to 100% off many of your fees in exchange for affordable housing. You get more of those fees back for the unit, the higher level of affordability, the deeper subsidy or deeper AMI you're trying to work with. And we also offer expedited review to move the project through quicker and development services. In addition, a couple other incentives and funding we have is the Home Investment Partnership Funds, mostly for the construction of affordable housing and tenant-based rental assistance, TBRA, through HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We also have $25 million affordable housing bond. Nikki and I will have an update on that in a few slides from now. Next slide, Nikki. And then we're also thinking of partners, that other wheelhouse, that the city is a convener collaborator. We are looking at partners, working with mission-driven, tax credit, nonprofit, and for-profit developers who, by nature, can attack different levels of those AMI, 30%, 50, 60. The for-profit developers usually will do that 80% and under to 60%. And all of those developers, all of those partners can help us produce, preserve, and protect affordable housing. And very important to note and remind from the September workshop of 2019 that we really do need for-profit developers at the table to be a part of the solution. We can't build our way out of our deficit or challenges without all developers at the table and some type of funding or incentive to work with them. So this slide, I often say, is kind of the world that Nikki and I live in many days, where we recognize our role as a funder. And so we have some very good incentives, including city-owned land there. There's other tools I mentioned. We have to understand what funding is out there for the variety of developers. Most developers know that, but it's important that we recognize that. You've got, of course, the area median incomes that we're trying to address, whether that's homeless, up to several AMIs, whether it's rehab, preserving or protecting, maintaining, permanent affordability. And then, of course, trying to match that with a variety of developers out there, mission-driven tax credit, nonprofit, and for-profits, and all of that with the community in mind of what they're looking for to have a place to call home. And so we try to live in this world to be able to match tools with AMIs, with partners and funding. Next slide. So another break for you all, and happy to answer any questions you might have.
Hey, Paul, I would like to see if you could, actually, I'm going to have another question in a second, though. Can you do like a brief discussion, kind of relating to Sage's earlier point, that how, even though it was counterintuitive, sometimes private developers building apartments that are not affordable end up being a positive on the market based on basic supply and demand economic theory? Can you go over that a little bit?
Sure. So, with, Asheville, again, kind of that quality of life and so many people wanting to live here, but there's so few units out there, particularly in home ownership, as well as rental. If they're able to build a 100-unit apartment complex and they're able to lease that up in, say, 3 to 5 months, other developers see that and report that there is a strong market and they're going to keep building units because there's a supply or keep adding to that supply because there's a demand, and they're not going to have to worry too much about the pricing because they know that if they build it, they will most likely be able to pay that approximately $1,200 in rent because the building that was just built leased up like that. So there is those natural economics of supply and demand, and you try to have a balance that keeps prices relatively low, or at least, following your inflation rate or something like that. But right now, even with the difficulties around COVID, those vacancy rates are staying at that 5%. There still seems to be a strong rental market in Asheville. And if that continues with not a huge supply and high demand, it doesn't allow those rents to come down as much as we would like, or at least level off.
And then I have a question that just came in from somebody watching the meeting, so I can relay that to you if you want. It says, can the city require private developers who receive incentives to accept housing choice vouchers?
So right now, recently, the land use incentive grant, we changed and updated that policy in, I believe it was October, November, where we now, to get that property tax rebate and grant, we now require that they accept housing choice vouchers. So we just added that in October and November. And I believe, as an example, the 20-80-20, if there were 100 units, 20 of them would have to be at a minimum affordable, and at least 5 of those 20 would have to accept housing choice vouchers, which of course assist individuals and families at or below 60% area median income.
Paul, can I just clarify though, Councilwoman Mosley didn't specify if the city is not involved in any kind of incentive or, anything, like they haven't loaned money, et cetera. Do we have the ability within the city limits to require that a landlord accept vouchers?
I do not believe so. That would be very similar to what would be called inclusionary zoning of some type, where we require 20% of units to be affordable. I know that Brad Branham is on the call and may have a legal perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I think you nailed it perfectly. Very, very close to the concept of inclusionary zoning. At this point in North Carolina, we do not have the legal authority, unfortunately, to place that obligation as a standard criteria for any development. However, to Councilwoman Mosley's point, if we have a subsidy in place or as part of a proposed development package, the housing choice voucher must, much like the inclusion of affordable units, becomes more of an incentive-based program. And in those situations, we do have much more flexibility and legal standing to be able to impose that obligation as a condition of receiving the subsidy.
And since you've now introduced a term, inclusionary zoning, can you just explain for the thousands of people out there in television land listening what that means and kind of give a brief idea? I think we generally know some cities and states that use the concept, but inclusionary zoning is kind of a wonky term. That maybe you could explain that and then give us kind of a background on what is, if anything, allowed in North Carolina.
Sure. Is that for Brad or myself?
Whoever wants to volunteer.
I'll take the first quick initial there, which is inclusionary zoning is a tool that's used in many states and municipalities across the country where they require developers of any type, if they're going to be building in their community, they require some level of affordability in those units. Usually this is rental, and usually it's a minimum of 20%. And so you see this, I think, many examples in Virginia and other states where you see it being used and used successfully. The developers aren't just turning away and going to another community. They're still working in that community. They understand that they have to do that for the privilege of doing business in that community. While recognizing we don't have that in North Carolina, and then also recognizing we need more developers at the table, more partners to be a part of the solution, we tried to find ways to incentivize that with the for-profit developers with that 20%, although it would be very nice to see that come in at a state level. Brad?
I think Paul nailed it, and I don't think I'll add too much at the risk of taking our thousands of viewers and reducing it to hundreds of viewers by my own comments. I will only add that this is a factor that you often hear about with a variety of other options that we wish we had at the municipal level in terms of authority. It is really a function of the type of state law that we have in terms of how cities and towns and counties are empowered. Often you will hear referred to us as what's called a Dillon's rule state as opposed to a home rule state. Many of the cities around the country that you see employing inclusionary zoning ordinances locally are these home rule states, whereby the cities and local municipalities have a great deal more power to set their own rules than we do here in North Carolina, where we're under a different framework. So right now in North Carolina, the inclusionary zoning power is not one that's been specifically given to cities, counties, and towns like it has in terms of home rule state authority.
And so, Brad,
Thank you.
just thought of something. That housing choice voucher could be properly included in our benefits consideration too, right?
I think that is absolutely an option that is worth some consideration. It is very much within the range of those sorts of things that we love to see from home builders that we don't have the authority to include in sort of by right decisions, but absolutely as part of an incentive-based program, such as whether it be through subsidies in the home building program or as part of a general scheme of rezoning approvals, whereby some additional consideration or option to streamline the process would be given to the developers.
I do have a couple questions. This is Kim. What are the current barriers to the city developing our own affordable housing?
So, Councilwoman Brony, assuming the community development or community economic development department taking on the role as actual developers?
Sure, any of that, or working with a developer to build on city-owned land, for example.
So I think we are going to be providing some examples of partnerships that we've done over the past year, as well as coming up on the pipeline of where we're partnering with developers. And for right now, the city is definitely looking at a variety of partners. They are contacting us because we think working with partners who do what they do best and we provide the funding is right now the best way to go to see if we can get more units and more affordable units in our community.
Thank you. And my other question is,
Can I just clarify with Paul to Councilwoman Roney's question specifically? I'm just trying to clarify that there's some of these where the city's land is actually involved. And then there's some of these where the city's partnership is not the city's land, but a financial grant or whatever, or loan. Okay, thanks.
The next question is for when we have partners who may be looking at mixed use, or if there's a potential for a cooperative land ownership model, that could look like retail. It could look like a mix of, if we consider this for lodging use for the moratorium, for example. What are our options, or urban place zoning? What are our options to partner with folks who could manage the rental side if, for example, the owner, like let's say it's a retail or a grocery opportunity, wasn't familiar with the management of housing? Are we kind of looking for those creative solutions, especially around, I'm just thinking about the urban place especially.
So the answer, I would think, and make sure I'm answering the question, is there are a lot of different types of developers out there who do any type of affordable work or building work. And what you are kind of describing a bit is an urban infill developer, per se, who's used to building apartments on the top and some kind of retail level. So they're used to working in that type of world. Some developers like building further out of the city, 3-story garden style walk-ups. Other developers like the model you're talking about, and they're used to working with activating their first floor and activating their commercial space, as well as building the units and adding affordability. You don't see quite as many of those necessarily in Asheville, but again, we're always trying to outreach to get more people interested in developing that type of product in Asheville.
And I'm also thinking as we approach decisions around our hotel moratorium rules, instead of just looking at the housing trust fund option, what we could do to get lodging use to offset the cost of housing, especially if there's a way to do that cooperatively owned. So I think we can start to see those two connected, since we do need housing on all the corridors with transit access and close to groceries and jobs. That's not a question. I'm just letting folks know that I'm hoping we connect that to our hotel moratorium rules and not just have folks buy their way out of housing, but help to participate in solutions and building it.
Any other questions?
I just have one more comment, maybe two. Circling back to Councilwoman Mosley's point about the private market creating units, I wanted to share something. I'm really concerned about housing, so I take a lot of time to ask some of the folks that are doing a lot, like realtors, what they're seeing. And I had some interesting conversations recently about, and you may have heard this anecdotally yourself as well, about folks paying cash for houses and how the houses are going so fast. And even in the pandemic, and people are relocating here, and it sounds like even higher percentages of the sales are going to folks relocating. I just wanted to share that I think that same theory applies to expensive residential houses as well, because I'm starting to see where our own folks that live here that can afford $300,000, $250,000, this $275,000 mark we've mentioned, are being outbid by cash offers from people that may have bought a more expensive house and would have qualified for it. It's almost like this weird counterintuitive impact on housing that is more affordable. And I call it I think the acronym is NOAA, naturally occurring affordable housing. So I just want to mention that. And then Paul, I think, can you easily jump back to your first slide of this particular set? Because I think it was where you were kind of seeing our tool. If not, it's okay. I just wanted to point out, I think that there's one we're missing in general that is on us, is on the city, and it keeps coming up. And I think maybe this group is concerned about it, and that is our own UDO and how we might revise it, look at it, update it, how our own review process is a tool in itself. We've talked about ombudsman for moving affordable projects to the head of the line, getting them longer inspections so they can move through quicker and so on like that. And I just wanted to say, I'd love updating our UDO and the impediments and the timeliness and the cost associated as one of the toolboxes we could tweak.
Absolutely, Sage, thank you for that. And just quickly, regulatory is one of the possible tools, but if I may, just in the interest of time, I would like, Nikki, if it's possible, to go back to those last few slides I had on what we've accomplished, and then I want to transfer over to you as soon as possible to make sure that we talk about the very important pipeline for 2021, but appreciate that, Sage. Quickly, what's needed in the Asheville housing market is a healthy, equitable, inclusive, mixed income community with a variety of housing types at a variety of price points, as we stated earlier. Next slide. And so we wanted to walk through a couple quick partnerships where over the last 12 to 18 months, Lee Walker Heights, as you all are familiar with, a partnership with Housing Authority, Mountain Housing Opportunities, many other folks, a $4.2 million investment, and a result of 212 affordable units. As you can see, there's a mix between 60, 50, and 30% AMI units at Lee Walker Heights. Next slide. And I'm sure anyone driving down Biltmore Avenue has seen they've just done a great job. We appreciate our partners very much. They've done a great job there on building those units. Nikki, next slide. 360 Hilliard Avenue, in partnership with Cassinger Development Group, a for-profit developer there, an investment of approximately $2.5 million between a few of our tools, Housing Trust Fund, Land Use Incentive Grant, City-Owned Land. And we're getting 34 affordable units out there, broken between 16 to 80% AMI with a 50-year period of affordability. Next slide, Nikki. Shows the picture of that development at the intersection of Hilliard and Kleeman. Next slide. Amaranth Apartments. This is a tax credit developer with Workforce Homestead, about a $1.5 million investment with not only Housing Trust Fund, but also home funds. You can see the mix of 60, 50, and 30% AMI units for 70 units in partnership in the city of Asheville. Next slide, Nikki. A picture of those units being built right now, hopefully coming online sometime in spring or summer. Next slide. Tribute Companies, a for-profit developer who is building on Ashland Avenue and Cox Avenue, about a $3.9 million land use incentive grant over a period where we'll get 49 affordable units at a breakdown between 80 and 60% AMI, a build in the urban core on the south slope. Next slide, Nikki. So rendering of what that will look like when it is finished. Nikki, thank you. And then lastly, Habitat, to talk a little bit about homeownership, an investment of $860,000 in Housing Trust Fund, 6 homes complete, 2 more coming. These are 8 homes for sale at or below 80% AMI. They are going to end up paying nearly all of that funding back. I think this could be a rinse and repeat model with them. Nikki, next slide. Some great pictures from Andy and the folks at Habitat there with the homes that they've built. Next slide. And so quickly, just over again the last 12 to 18 months in 2020, about 373 units of affordable housing, covering the 30, 50, 60, and 80% AMI, including some for home ownership, a $13 million city investment, about $35,000 per unit investment for that outcome. Next slide. All the resources there that you can learn about with these links, whether it's the tax credits have been billed in Buncombe County and other updates and our partnership with the School of Government to tell our investment story. Next slide, Nikki. And any questions there, just looking at time at about 3:45, and to transition to Nikki to tell our pipeline for 2021. Thanks, and I will go ahead and introduce Nikki Reed with our Community and Economic Development Department. Nikki, I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Happy to be here. And so, yes, now the idea is to really shift and talk about our work plan for 2021. I think you've just seen kind of the results of these policies, these investments, and what we're seeing coming out of the ground now. But now we want to reframe and really look to the future of 2021 and these opportunities that are going to be coming before council up in the coming calendar year. So with that, we do a quick reminder really of the policy framework that led to this pipeline that we're getting ready to discuss. So in 2019, this slide really talks back to establishing a unit goal of 200 units per year. Also looking at those needs served. So Paul touched on that earlier about the 80% AMI below. And especially on city land, our targets are a bit deeper because we have a little more element of control there with city land, and we really want to go for that 60% AMI. And here is absolutely where we can require acceptance of housing choice vouchers through the nature of that real estate transaction. So that is something that we're looking at specifically with city-owned land. Again, now we're also going to see how we're promoting leveraged investments with this strategy. So really looking at bringing in the city dollars, but also ensuring that it matches with investments from other sources. At the time that we did this slide in 2019, we talked about the county. We're going to be highlighting some partnerships with Dogwood Health Trust coming up. The other thing that Councilwoman Roney had mentioned is this idea of prioritizing geographic areas. That access to jobs, the access to services and community amenities is the other really key component to making these projects successful. So with that, next slide is here. There we go. So we're also thinking about just how to frame this conversation as we walk through this. We want to look at a really kind of broad overview of these strategies and these proposals, knowing that they're going to be coming before council on a deeper dive later on. So really on that high level thinking, we're looking at who are the partners, what is the process that we're using, what are some of the resources that the city is being asked to contribute towards these proposals, what are the intended results that we're after, and then what is really the timeline, so that calendar for the policy decisions. So today we're going to cover these in the next slides: 319 Biltmore, Deaverview, the Talbert Lot, Asheland, neighborhood lots for affordable housing, and then we'll end up with Homeward Bound. And again, I'm going to kind of be going through this, but I am certainly happy to take questions as we go through. So just give me a note when you have any questions. So 319 Biltmore. So the 319 Biltmore proposal that's come forward is a mixed-use, mixed-income development. That's 250 units of studio, 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, along with 19,000 square feet of commercial space. This is a proposal from Homes Urban and in partnership with McMillan, Pazd, and Smith. And this is a partnership with Homes Urban. We did an RFQ process to select Homes Urban as the top-ranked developer. And we really had 9 really great proposals as a result of this process. And as the selection committee weighed the final proposals, we looked at Homes Urban and their ability to really exceed our city council goals. So you're seeing there that they have 50 units of affordable at 60% AMI, 25 at 80% AMI for 30 years. They're really wanting to bring.
Sorry to interrupt you. Just for everyone else who's watching, this is the Matthews Ford side, right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Absolutely. This is
just so everyone has a frame of reference. Thanks.
So, and directly adjacent to Lee Walker Heights. So you saw in that picture earlier, there was some grading along the frontage there at Biltmore, and that is the 319 site. So looking at a partnership with Homes Urban, they really also wanted to bring a community that brought Lee Walker together with their development through a proposal that addressed the social determinants of health and really talk about wellness. That was really key in their partnership with MAHAC, as you see that listed there. And truly, I think another point of this proposal is the idea of city resources. So they're asking for a city land contribution, but otherwise they're going to be able to put this together through a financial pro forma that only requires the city land as a subsidy. So we felt this was a really strong proposal, and we'll be bringing it forward for council's consideration sometime in the spring of this year.
Where is Home Urban's headquartered?
I believe they are headquartered out of Greenville, South Carolina. I'm looking at Paul, yes. Okay. So next, let's talk about Deaverview. So the Deaverview purpose-built community, and I'll just orient us here as we look at the map. So what you're seeing here is we've highlighted the 20 acres that really makes up the Deaverview Apartments, which is owned by the Housing Authority. You travel a little bit further down on Deaverview Road, and the city has put 21 acres of property under contract. This was a decision made by council this past summer to go under contract to purchase 21 acres there. And then you'll see moving further west, there's existing city-owned property. We call it Cedar Hill. We've been looking at it for a while in terms of seeing affordable housing on that 15-acre site. So with this, we're looking to partner with the Housing Authority on creating a master plan for this entire 60 acres based on the purpose-built communities principle. And so I'll go to the next slide to really talk about what that means. And so the purpose-built communities principle is based off of this idea of mixed income housing. So there with 60 acres, we're hoping to achieve the potential of 300 units of housing. And this will include new housing for the residents at Deaverview Apartments. One of the key considerations in a partnership with the Housing Authority is the ability to have residents really be a part of that design process and then be able to move into the new housing rather than relocate and come back. This partnership on the master planning for the 60 acres would allow that to happen. The other key component of the purpose-built model is the idea of really supporting kids and really supporting teens and that growth potential of the people in that community. And so looking at affordable childcare and or a new high-performing school. So these are some of the other things that we'll be looking into. Seeking partnerships on is really to how do we create this career to college and career pipeline. Another key element of purpose-built is community wellness. And so our Parks and Recreation Department is a strong partner here, and they are with us in this planning process to locate a new community center within that 60-acre footprint to provide the element of wellness. And also, again, looking to see, are there any opportunities for other kind of health services, et cetera. So you'll see this is really more of a partnership model where we're working with the Housing Authority in partnership because they are the adjacent owner of the property. They have selected Mountain Housing Opportunities as the developer for the housing for the Deaverview residents. We also have a lot of city internal departments that are partnering, so the planning staff as well as the park staff will be heavily involved. We're wanting to speak with Buncombe County, the Dogwood Health Trust, so really creating a partnership around the purpose-built model. So that master planning process will be ongoing this year, and what council will see come before them is likely an MOU or a partnership agreement with the Housing Authority that outlines the nature of that partnership. So whether that's, a city land contribution, because we're definitely talking about city land here. The other key thing is because of the potential impact of this area, we really want to direct our affordable housing bond dollars into this project as well because of the ability to see those dollars really have an impact on this community. And so that's another element that will come before council for policy decisions. So that timeline, again, is going to be early spring 2021. Okay, great. So we will continue here. So the Talbert Lot. So this one is a land banking strategy. And so we're excited that we're under contract to purchase the Talbert Lot. The proposition here is to acquire property to expand our downtown transit center, but also do affordable mixed income housing alongside it. So you'll see again the map here. You see our city transit station there highlighted to the north. And then the Talbert Lot is a 0.89 acre property directly adjacent. And so we're under contract to purchase that now. And again, the results here is land banking of a key site. And I will say one of the most exciting things about this is the potential partnership with the Dogwood Health Trust. So the Dogwood Health Trust has agreed to fund half of the purchase price of this property. And again, it's fair market value. $2.5 million is the asking price for this property. And so with Dogwood Health Trust coming in as a 50-50 partner, it's a great opportunity to really work with them on this property. And I think, in reflecting on their partnership, they really want to see, equitable results as it comes to improved transit services, equitable outcomes in terms of housing provision, but then also this property is in an area that was known for the former redlined area of Asheville. And so the other component here is really to be intentional about the repurposing of property that was in an area formerly redlined, and so to be intentional about that as well. So we are hoping to bring forward to council that policy decision to accept the grant from Dogwood Health Trust, as well as to allocate the dollars to purchase the property. That will come from the sale of property to White Labs. I mentioned that here. We actually closed on the sale of 172, 174 South Charlotte Street to White Labs in December. And so part of those proceeds of sale will be directed towards this acquisition.
Thank you. I have a quick question about this one. Just wanted to confirm that there is potential for this not to only be a transit center, but hopefully potentially a transportation hub. Can we confirm that that's still on the table because it's not on this list of benefits?
And it should be. I think that's a key component. And so Jessica Morris has been heavily involved with this. And we're very much at the initial stages, of course, identifying it as a key location because of the proximity to the existing transit center. But also, I think we're gearing up for what it's going to look like on a community design process for what could be on this site. So I think that's an important element, and we will certainly note that.
Thank you.
Okay, so I will keep going. So the Asheland proposal, so the Haywood Street congregation, Haywood Street Community Development have proposed to build 42 units of permanently affordable housing on an acre of city land located on Ashland Avenue. And so this proposal is to build 42 permanently affordable apartments on a city acre site. Within that 42 permanently affordable apartments, they are also wanting to reserve 20 units for people making extremely low incomes. So I think about what we were looking at before about partners who are doing the work on some of our extremely low incomes, that subsidy gap that's required to do work within those incomes. So I think that's part of the major components here of this proposal. We will be seeing this go before council on February 23rd, so this one will be coming up very soon, where council will be asked to vote on whether or not the city would enter into a contract to sell the land for $1 to Haywood Street. So the resources that are on the table here is really that city land contribution, as well as the Housing Trust Fund of $1 million. So those two elements are really what is being proposed for this. And again, that's a lot having to do with the amount of funds that it really takes to see permanent affordability, as well as 100% affordable. So all units will be affordable, and then reaching that really lower income bracket. And so you're starting to see, I think, with this portfolio, this pipeline, this continuum of housing that we talked about earlier, that Deborah mentioned earlier, how we're seeing different incomes served, different types of housing, and different types of proposals coming forward to council. And did I see, Sage, did you want to have a question? Yes, go for it.
Thanks, Nikki. Great job, by the way, so far. Have we ever seen, to your knowledge, a project come to us with a permanently affordable structure that didn't have like tax credits or some other entity beyond ourselves and our little subsidies happen? I can't recall one.
That is a great question, and I think Paul and I would need to kind of, Paul, any.
Just quickly, I think that the Homeward Bound Short Michigan is going to be 13 units of permanent supportive housing. I believe they're offering permanent affordability. I can't think of their financial structure, but we had about $526,000 in a housing trust fund loan there, I believe, or home funds. But yes, but a smaller scale to a certain extent.
I guess I just wanted to point out how remarkable it is to get a permanent. You know, we just saw that other slide in the previous conversation about for 20 years, it's like $100,000 for a developer to get it down to 60 AMI. So we're talking about forever. Thank you.
Well, and we're going to learn more about this project as it comes forward. But I assume that it's dependent on a financial structure that, to support permanent affordability. I'll just be interested to learn how that will work. I've had several conversations with Dogwood Health Trust about how they envision their participation in the community around affordable housing. And one of the models that they talked about was, instead of what most private developers deal with, which is, essentially they're building a product that they're going to sell on the market eventually, and they're having to think about that rate of return and building in affordability that will still provide for a rate of return on the market rate units. Dogwood Health Trust as a financial providing financing for a development like this might take the equity interest that you would otherwise be looking at being privately owned. So I think they open the door for a possibility of creating more non-public housing that is permanently affordable, or at least affordable for much longer periods of time. Folks, staff, correct me if I'm wrong, but in my conversations with them, that's what struck me about this opportunity.
I also wanted to share, it wasn't that long ago that we were sitting down and saying, you know what, our goal this year really needs to be able to work with the county on housing. You know what, this next year we're going to work with the county, and now we're doing it. And I wanted to point that out because that is not something that's been happening for very long. And this is, again, in the city, the county, Dogwood. I just really wanted to point out the participation and collaboration is something that's key. Good job, staff, on doing that, by the way.
Great. Thank you all. So we will move on. So now we're going to shift gears and talk about opportunities for home ownership. And so this is with what we call our Neighborhood Lots for Affordable Housing program. And so you're seeing here a duplex that Asheville Area Habitat for Humanity has built on Curry Court. And so we took this as Habitat is going to be one of our partners on the city-owned lot development here. So we identified 3 smaller city-owned vacant sites within, residential neighborhoods, 2 in West Asheville, Kentucky and Lufty, and 1 in the Montfort area, that's in West Chestnut Street. And so our partners here is that we're going to be partnering with Asheville Area Habitat for Humanity on the Kentucky Ave property, as well as the Asheville Buncombe Community Land Trust with the Juna Group for the parcels at Lufty Avenue and West Chestnut. And so that is still in process. Those 2 partners were our top candidates after the RFP process concluded. You'll see here some of the price points that they're seeking to meet, I think, which is great. I think Paul was really pointing to that earlier in where the need is and what price points would be affordable to people in our community. So we're really excited about this homeownership opportunity and feel that with the resources of city land contribution and funding, which we did see with the Community Land Trust, this is how this is coming together and using those tools. So again, I think we're looking at the April-May timeframe to bring that forward to committees and to council. Okay, so last we'll round out, and actually I was going to ask Paul to talk about this one. I think he's really our project manager for this. So Paul, do you want to share some on the Homeward Bound?
Absolutely. Thanks, Nikki. So I'm not sure how many people have heard of this proposal, but it is what's listed here is 80 units. Just speaking with Homeward Bound earlier today, they believe they can do 85 units of permanent supportive housing at the Old Days Inn on Tunnel Road. They have the property under contract, and they are looking to put those 85 units sometime possibly at the beginning of 2022 online, where they're not only going to offer those units for permanent supportive housing, but 24-hour support on site, built-in resources, as they're going to save some of the open space, the units there for meeting space, therapy, counseling, etc., and also the community and growth that they could see working with the community and a successful transition from homelessness to housing. So again, 85 units of permanent supportive housing, serving individuals at or below 30% AMI, are chronically homeless folks in Asheville. Partners, they're putting together Homeward Bound. They're having talks, obviously, with many other entities. We look at this as a potential partnership. Their resources there with what they're looking for at $2 million in funding to be able to move this forward. I think it's interesting to note that in the numbers when it comes to housing somebody who is homeless. It costs about $13,000 is the average annual cost per person for permanent supportive housing. The annual cost for someone being homeless, including medical treatments, behavioral interventions, engagement with public services, is anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000. So there could be a projected savings to the community of about $1.5 to $3.2 million in annual savings. So this is seen somewhat as a game changer for permanently supportive housing.
And so I also wanted to speak too on just our ongoing evaluation. So we are looking to map the properties that came to the city's ownership through urban renewal. And so that map is underway now. I've seen the first draft of it, and we're getting ready to present that internally and then share it to community. We do have property in the River District, so we continue to evaluate that on the opportunities for affordable housing, and then South Charlotte Street in the future as well. And so I wanted to just talk about the bond quickly, and then I think we'll wrap it up and turn it back over to Deborah. So what we're seeing with the bond, we see, high impact investments where we're seeing 319 Lee Walker Heights, the Deaverview purpose built here. Paul has managed housing trust funds, so we've seen a lot of that housing trust fund dollars go out with a balance of about $500,000 remaining. With our land banking funds, we're seeing, again, investments in the Deaverview purpose built with the purchase of that property. We still have available funding there, so we're looking for opportunities actively. We also have, again, the Community Land Trust. We spoke about that a little bit earlier as it relates to the Neighborhood Lots program, and then the $1 million in down payment assistance, which I know is coming before council soon. So I really feel like the deliverables on the bond have contributed to this overall story of where we've seen success and where we want to go. So again, with this recap, we'll say, here's the projects, here's what we're hoping to achieve as our goal. 500 units of housing potentially through these the slate of projects, and that is a $23 million city investment. So really in land and in financial resources, that represents a $23 million investment there. And so wrapping up, we talk about policy, we talk about community, we talk about capacity, partners, how we get there. And so with council's vision, with the vision that was set forth in the 2019 work session, with the policies that have been created and the support financially through the bond with our community, this is what we're seeing. We're seeing the success story of about 373 units actively being built. Now that's a $13 million city investment there, leveraged alongside nonprofit and private investment, and then our work plan for 2021 with the potential 500 units and that investment there. So I think with that, we're wanting to then kind of open up housing and looking for. So Paul, did you want to wrap this up, and then we'll?
And then take. Absolutely. So after the September 2019 work session, Deborah, city manager, and city management had challenged us to put together some kind of overreaching policy about affordable housing. I think everyone's seen how we've tried to put these tools together and really enhance these tools to make them usable. Hopefully, we're able to demonstrate that they have worked, and hopefully they'll continue to work this year. But we're wanting to take our affordable housing policy, what we're calling beyond the transaction, for a more holistic affordable housing policy, so that some of these, the build itself, we understand the financial transaction and the subsidy, but can we take it a step further about what the community's needs are and where these developments are built, and talk about the energy efficiency, the anti-displacement gentrification, design standards so that these units look just like any other house is built, strong, compassionate community property management, equity and inclusion, community outreach, and being careful not to concentrate moderate or low incomes in our community. And perhaps we were challenged before with 200 units. I could be on a slight vacation high here, but maybe we go to 250 units, because I think, as the kids would say, we've got some receipts to show here that these policies collectively are working together. The partners, we definitely always are looking for more, but out of community and economic development, we feel we're on a pathway and looking for some direction to somewhat codify with you all. And with that, we're happy to take any questions. Thank you, Deborah and City Council.
I'm wondering where you went on your vacation so I can get some of that vacation high.
Sure.
Can we go go back one slide? This is Kim asking that. So one of the things that I'm not seeing here, and I guess I'm just looking for it explicitly, is accessibility, because it makes housing less affordable when you have to rely on a vehicle, and then parking and gas and upkeep of that vehicle. So I remember looking this up when the Amaranth Apartments first came up, and the availability to get from downtown at the transit center to that location, the last time that you can use a bus to connect is 4:30. So it really does make it so that folks have to, especially if someone's working in an evening shift, have to rely on a car. So it might make the housing less affordable. So is there a way that you're seeing accessibility or transportation as part of this policy beyond the transaction?
So possibly it is in our land use incentive grant. It's one of the point systems in the scoring sheet on page 2 of that policy that talks about how close it is to transportation, bus lines, etc. I think the problem has to do with something mentioned earlier with the supply of available land and where developers can actually find land that's reasonable to purchase, and then, you know, crossing your fingers or hoping that there's a bus station or some better transportation in the area. That is a challenge. It's listed in policies, but hasn't necessarily threshed out in this overall holistic affordable housing policy as of yet.
And I remember this conversation coming up over the years at the Regional Housing Consortium level. Is affordable housing being built as close to Buncombe County as possible, not necessarily close to the things that make daily life possible in our neighboring counties. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to look at collaborating with the county. I know Sage has mentioned that earlier, on what it looks like to build strong and accessible communities for long-term resiliency.
I did want to echo too. I think with the update to Luigi, or just to our even housing trust fund, what we did was we looked at the future transit growth too, the transit master plan as it laid out, so we wouldn't just be always behind the goal. We'd be saying, well, these places are going to get it one day. And I was going to say something else, but I think I've lost it. Great job, staff, though. I really wanted to just kind of say, wow. And I guess to the 3 of you women who were on council this last term, too, I mean, you really got it heavy loaded. I mean, this is a great response. This is a lot of time, a lot of work. And I know there's so much more to do that I would be remiss if we didn't just say this is a powerful presentation of success. And I know many of you have been a part of it along the way, so kudos and thank you.
Can I ask a quick question? Sorry. You mentioned the numbers about how much it costs to house someone who's been houseless versus what the community pays in the event that someone is houseless annually. I know some of those costs are borne by the city, but some of those costs are not borne by the city. They're borne by our health system, et cetera, et cetera. Is there some sort of model that gets the other organizations that benefit from these houseless people becoming housed and supported, that, where they share in the costs of doing this work? I don't know that I'm being very articulate, but I guess, it comes to mind that like Mission Hospital is going to benefit. I mean, and that was the only one that came to mind, but someone like a Mission Hospital is clearly going to benefit from folks that don't need their services for free. And I'm just wondering if there's a way that we can encourage them based on this savings to get involved up front in these kind of efforts.
Sure, and I think Councilwoman Whistler, that's a great question, and creative thinking there too. I will certainly reach out to Homeward Bound to talk a little bit about that, but you are correct. Some of that savings comes from other areas of the community. So I don't know of any example offhand. I know, of course, there's some other agencies that are interested in supporting this, and they're talking to lots of potential investors and partners. So I'll follow up on that.
I'm sorry, I
remembered the thing
interrupted you.
I just remembered the thing I was going to share, which is the H&T index, the Housing and Transportation Index. Tim had referenced the cost of transportation, and this is a mapping tool. You can go through and type in your area, zoom in, and see what the transportation cost is for that area. So as we look at, where should we put housing to reduce housing costs, it doesn't really help if we put it out here where it triggers twice as much transportation costs. That map is a really useful tool.
It also might make our neighbors in South Asheville's housing more affordable for them to stay in if they had more access to transit by us, implementing the first fiscal year 2 of the Transit Master Plan.
I want to thank staff for putting this presentation together. It's really nice to see it all summarized, all the work that's been going on for a very long time. And I also want to say, we have some really talented staff that know a lot about this topic, obviously, and are able to think about all the potential tools in the toolbox and how we might use them here in Asheville. And the way you present it makes it look like it's kind of not that complicated, but I know that it really is extremely complicated. So, and this has been such an evolution to watch happen. The council before I came on, I just started the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And so just think about what's happened since then. Of course, the need outpaces our ability to meet it. And that diverging line, I'm sure if we were to chart it, is, not a good one for people seeking housing in our community. But we're going to keep working at this tirelessly. I do also think that you're doing a great job of leveraging a lot of other partners and resources in our community. As I have said for many, many years, we're not going to be able to spend ourselves out of an affordable housing crisis, just us, the city. So thank you all so much for doing that. One of the things that COVID did to us, of the bazillion long list of things, was took away our opportunity to go visit a purpose-built community outside of Charlotte, along with folks from Dogwood. We were going to go do that, but I'm very interested in continuing to explore that model, and I'm interested in Deaverview being redeveloped with that idea in mind. And it's a science-based approach, but it really is more about the human and what do humans need to be successful in their lives, and providing things like childcare on site, schools on site, services like that help people be successful and happy, are going to be so vitally important. And that really is going to require us to continue, again, to work with partners who are going to be able to provide those other anchor provisions in those communities for us. So anyway, I just highlight that you guys are awesome, and I look forward to doing more of this. So on the list, you asked about the list of the things. The thing I would pull out is that purpose-built community concept, and emphasizing that.
Well, if I could just say a couple of closing remarks as well. Thank you all for your attention, your passion, especially today in receiving a whole lot of information. But we thought it was vitally important that not only we present this to you as elected officials, but also to the community. I know there's a lot of need, and sometimes even some frustration that people feel that the city isn't doing it fast enough, quick enough. I hope that we've demonstrated that for a community of this size, when I first came here, coming from Charlotte, I was amazed at the number of tools that you have available, and that you were really serious about trying to address this issue. And that's one of the reasons that attracted me to this community, is that we do have a passion for trying to address this issue. It is complicated, it is hard, but I cannot tell you, if we did not have the staff that we have, and we don't have a lot, paying attention to this issue. It would quickly get away from us, but I cannot say enough for the community and economic development staff, obviously Nikki and Paul, but all the other folks that you don't see making presentations, including the director, Sam Powers, who usually isn't again, making a formal presentation, but the talent is deep, the bench is deep. And I just wanted to, again, say thank you to the staff. Thank you, elected officials, for allowing us to do the things that we are doing to what we hope will address or help address this issue. So going forward, you saw a number of things for our 2021 work plan. That's what we're going to focus on. And we will be back in less than a month with some proposals, potentially Talbot for Asheland. There's a lot going on. So stay tuned. And again, thank you all for your time.
Okay, with that, we're going to sign off, and we'll be right back here on this virtual screen at 5 o'clock for tonight's city council meeting.
Thank you.